Good morning, everyone. Today, we are going to take up the topic of self in Indian thought. So, we are going to understand the meaning of self, how self has been understood in the Indian philosophical tradition. This topic is a unit in our paper on psychology of individual differences. So we have understood many attributes which differentiate people from each other, for example, intelligence, for example, personality. Today, we are going to look at this notion of self, the meaning of self, जिसको हम हिंदी में बोलते हैं स्वयं. We are going to look at this notion of self from the perspective of the Indian tradition. Till now, most of the psychology that we have learned from the Western perspective. We have learned psychology, most of the concepts like intelligence, memory, personality, cognition. We have learned about these terms from the Western psychological perspective. So, most of the psychology that we study is the psychology that we get from the West. And when we say West, we mean the regions of Europe and United States of America. So, most of the psychology that we study comes to us from the West, from these nations. Why do we need to have Indian psychology? Why do we need to have why do we need to understand concepts from Eastern perspective or from Indian thought? Because people think differently, people understand attributes of human beings differently when they are placed in different cultures, when they share different commonalities of understanding, when they share different assumptions of about nature, about human beings. So what people have found out in general is that our understanding of what a human being is and what a human being seeks is very different in the Western tradition and in the Eastern tradition. How is it different? That we will find out in the coming slides. Now, if you look at the Eastern and the Western philosophical traditions, there are very, very different kinds of questions that have guided the Western psychological thought and the Eastern psychological thought. According to Professor Anand Paranjpe, who is an established name and who has written volumes in this area of trying to find out a comparison, trying to find out a parallel between commonalities between the Western conceptualization of human being and the Eastern conceptualization of human being. So the Western psychology, in simpler words, Professor Paranjpe has been trying to find out parallels or commonalities between the Western way of looking at human beings and the Eastern way of looking at human beings. So he has gone very deep into texts, the Indian texts, the Indian ancient texts, and tried to find out the meaning of human beings, how different texts have looked at human beings, what meaning do they give to human beings, and how that compares or how that matches with the Western philosophical traditions and the Western notion of what a human being is. So, in simpler words, there according to people who have researched in this area, and one of those people and very prominent people is Professor Parajpe, there is a difference in how Western psychological perspective looks at the Western psychology in general, looks at human being and what the human being seeks in life, and there is a difference in how Indian psychological perspective or the Indian philosophical traditions, the Indian ancient traditions, look at human beings and what they seek in life. There is a difference in what has guided the theoretical perspectives in the West and the theoretical perspectives in the East. To simplify matters, how psychology has looked at human beings has been dominated by a desire to find out repeatable patterns of human behavior, whereas in Eastern thought there is a focus on trying to find out the absolute truth. So, the theories that you find coming from the West about personality or about other psychological constructs are theories which are generally guided by a search for repeatable patterns of human behavior, patterns which can be replicated, patterns which can be repeatedly, which can be seen occurring in a repeated fashion, and that makes it possible for us to predict and control behavior. Whereas in Indian thought, there is a search for an absolute truth. There is a search for something that is eternally, absolutely true, and that search has guided the Eastern perspective's understanding of what a human being is and what a human being seeks. So, in simpler words, there is a difference between how Western psychology has developed, because Western psychology has based itself on the search of repeatable patterns of behavior which can be predicted and which can be controlled. Prediction and control is one important, um, you know, aim which has guided psychological theorizing in the West, whereas in the East there is no such focus. The aim is not to find out repeatable patterns, but to find out something which is eternally absolutely true. The so if you look at it closely, there is a difference in the search. In the Western tradition, the search is more about patterns which can be repeated, which can be predicted, which can be controlled, whereas in the East, there is a search about what is eternally, what is absolutely, what is always absolutely true. So, absolute truth has guided the conceptualization of human being and the conceptualization of what the human being seeks. Now, let us come to the crux of this video. What is the meaning of self in Indian thought? Now, in Indian thought, we can divide the schools of different schools of Indian thought. We have learned about schools of Western thought. We have learned about schools of psychology in the Western tradition. We know about psychoanalytic school of thought. We know about Gestalt psychology. We know about behaviorism. We know about cognitive behaviorist school. Similarly, in the Eastern thought, we have different schools of thought, we have different traditions looking at various aspects related to the human existence. So, the schools of thought in the Indian tradition or in the Indian thought can be um, divided into two broad categories. One comprises of those schools which are based on the Upanishads or the ancient Indian texts, and the other school, like Buddhism, is that school which is not based on the Upanishadic knowledge, which are not based on the ancient text or the Upanishads. Coming to the first category of schools, those schools of Indian thought which base themselves on the ancient text of Upanishads, according to these schools, the self has a dual nature, the self has a twin role to play. The self is both a subject and an object at the same time. The self, on the one hand, is the experiencer, is the one which undergoes the experiences, and at the same time, the self can go at a distance and look at that experiencing self. So the self within each one of us, जिसको हम स्वयं बोलते हैं, within each one of us, the swayam, the self, can experience and also look at that experience. So when you experience something, you are immersed, you are absorbed in the experience. And when you look at, when you reflect, when you think about that experience, or when you know that this was experienced by me, then you are separating yourself from that experience and looking at that experience from a distance. So when I say that I felt happy, there is an experiencing self within me which felt happy, and there is also an observant self within me. There is a self which is trying to witness the happiness that myself experienced. So the self is at the same time, according to the schools which follow the Upanishadic knowledge, self has a dual nature. Self is both an experiencer and also at the same time a reflect a part which can reflect on the experience of the experiencer. So when I say I feel happy, there is an I which felt happy, and there is an I which can think about or which can feel that a part of me felt happy. So there is an experiencer, and there is a self, there is a part of me which can look at my own experience of happiness. So the self has, according to the Upanishadic tradition, the self has a dual nature which is called drik in Sanskrit, drik and drishya. So drik is the self, the part of the self which is experiencing, and drishya is the self which can be seen, which can be observed. So the all the social roles, all your thoughts, all your I am a student, I am a good student, I am good at studies, I am good at music, I am good at painting. All this is coming from the self as object part. All this is coming from I am my parents' daughter. I am I'm sister to my brother. All these are coming from self as object. When you are looking at yourself in terms of social roles, in terms of your thoughts, in terms of your abilities, so this is the part of the self which is called the drishya, or the self as an object. When we come to self as subject is the center of awareness. Self as subject is the experiencing being within you. There is this experiencer within you which is experiencing everything, which is undergoing lot of experiences. That center of awareness, that center of consciousness, which is known as Drik in Sanskrit, which is written as Drik in Sanskrit, is what we call as the self as subject. Now, it is very, very interesting to note that self as subject is the consciousness or the awareness underlying the various changes that take place in the self as object. Self as object is susceptible to change. Self as object changes every time we think something in terms of worldly things, in terms of our social roles. Every time we have a thought, every time we think that I am not good enough, or I am good enough, I am capable enough. Sometimes we feel I feel happy, sometimes I feel sad, sometimes I feel that I have been able to achieve my goal, sometimes the goal is not achieved. So, this self as an object keeps changing with time, keeps changing in different situations. The self as an object is that experience of yourself, is that self that you have within you, which identifies with the social roles, with thoughts, with dreams, with aspirations, with desires, with opinions. And your opinions, desires, aspirations, goals, social roles, identities, they keep changing with time. But the self as subject, the experiencer, the conscious awareness that is there within you, that is something which stays there forever. So, self as subject is that consciousness, that awareness which does not change, which is that permanent kind of awareness that you have about your own self. And self as an object is all the identifications, all the attachments that you have with goals, with identities, with social roles, with thoughts, with dreams, with emotions, all these are bound to change with time. All these are bound to change in different situations. So, self as subject, or the experience, the conscious experience, the center of conscious experience, which never changes, is what is understood in the Indian thought according to Advaita Vedanta, which is one of the schools of Indian thought. The self as the center of awareness is that center of awareness which is always constant, which is always permanent, stays with you, and that self is what is understood as the real self in the Indian thought, and that is what we call as the Atma or the Atman. So, Atma or the Atman is that self within you which is the center of consciousness, which stays there every time you identify with a role, with an emotion. So when your roles are changing, your self as an object is changing, your thoughts are changing, your opinions are changing, but what remains stable within you is your awareness, is an awareness, is a consciousness that it is you who is changing. So this is the duality of the self that we talked about a little earlier. Duality of self means precisely this, that there are various changing things within you, that all that changes within you in terms of your potential, in terms of your opinions, in terms of your feelings, in terms of your social roles, so many things that change within you with time as you grow, as you develop. But there is a center of consciousness within you, there is a center of awareness within you which remains the same. There is a sameness within you which stays with you forever, no matter what role you take up, what opinion you have, what feelings you undergo. That experiencing self, that center of consciousness is the Atman, and that is considered to be the real self in Advaita Vedanta. So, what changes? All the changes that take place in you is not the real self. What is the real self is that permanent, absolute, uh, constant kind of awareness that stays within you, even in spite of the changes that you see happening within yourself. That center of consciousness which remains the same, that part within you that remains the same, that runs through all, that awareness that runs through all the changes that you undergo, is your real self. Now it is very, very interesting to note that the various identifications that you have, the various when you identify, is that when you relate with something, if you identify, for someone there can be an identification with, I am good at studies, I am a good student, I am a sincere student, I am good looking person, I have a good personality. Now all these are bound to change. Something happens in your life and you are bound to have a different opinion about yourself. You will say, nobody is as stupid as I am. So this change that takes place within you is something that is giving you ups and downs, that is giving you happiness and sorrow, happiness and sorrow. So that is what is called as self as an object, and that is not considered to be the real self in Advaita Vedanta. What is real self in Advaita Vedanta? In Advaita Vedanta, the real self within you is that center of consciousness, that awareness of you being you, which stays with you even when you change, even when you undergo changes of different kinds. And that center of awareness is what is called as the Atma. Now the question is, if the real self is the subjective experience, is the conscious experience, center of that consciousness, center of that conscious experience that we always, that keeps changing, there are certain changes which are taking place within me, and there is a center of conscious awareness which gives me a sense of sameness even in spite of the changes that take place. Now, that center of conscious experience can be how can we reach that center of conscious experience? It is very, very interesting to note that to reach that center of conscious experience, we need to have a state of mind, a state of consciousness where this subject object distinction disappears, where you are so much at one with what you are experiencing that you become what you experience. That is the state which we call as Nirvikalp Samadhi. Nirvikalp Samadhi is that state of consciousness where there is no distinction between self as an object and self as a subject. These are the moments where you find yourself at one with what you are experiencing. Generally, in life, what happens is that there is an I which says that I am good, I am a good student, and there are certain moments in our life when we cease to feel that I am this or I am that. Those are the moments when you are so much immersed in the experience of whatever you are that there is no distinction between self as a subject and self as an object. You get immersed in that experience so much that there is no distinction. Those are the moments of ultimate bliss, those are the moments of ultimate happiness and peace of mind within you. These are the moments of awareness, these are the moments, blissful moments, which one experiences when one plays an instrument, or when one listens to really good music, or one sings, you know, good music, or one paints. Sometimes the painters, they get involved in their painting so much that they even forget that they are painting, and they keep painting for hours together. Those are the experiences, those are the real life instances of getting in touch with the center of conscious awareness, or the Atma. Atma is that self within you, which is the metaphysical self, which is beyond all physical reality, and which can be felt only when there is no distinction between who is experiencing and who is looking at that experience. These are the moments of ultimate bliss and peace within a human being. And these moments come when you connect yourself with a purpose, when you connect yourself with creativity, with creating something new, beautiful, good for others. These are the moments when you feel at one with everything around you. And these are the feelings which those of us who saw the documentary, in the documentary Had Anhad, there were many such moments when we felt ultimate bliss and ultimate compassion within us, because we could, for the time being, for a very short while, for few moments, we were able to suspend our identities, suspend ourself as this or that or that or that. So we were so much immersed, because that documentary is also musical. So we got immersed in that documentary. There were many moments when we could feel that yes, there is something which is very powerfully positive, which is very powerfully taking us into the ocean of compassion, and connect with all that surrounds us, with all that is, around us. We tend to feel a connect with everything that is around us, and these are the moments of ultimate positivity, ultimate compassion, absolute bliss, absolute compassion, absolute empathy with people around, with the cosmos around, that we fail to remain separate from it, and we feel that we are a part of this big huge cosmos. That is what we understand as self as. That is when we realize the real self according to Advaita Vedanta, which is the Atma. Now, coming to another school in the Indian thought, we have talked about Advaita Vedanta a little in detail, and Advaita Vedanta is that school of Indian thought which follows the Upanishadic ancient texts. Coming to another category of schools in the Indian thought, uh, we had talked about the two categories within Indian thought. One category of schools within Indian thought, they talk about the Upanishadic knowledge, and they base their understanding of self on the Upanishadic knowledge. There is another category of schools such as Jainism, Buddhism, Sufism, Bhakti movement that we had in India. All these also talk about self because they invariably talk about human beings and human experience. But they do not base their knowledge, they do not base their understanding of self on the Upanishads. So, according to Buddhism was given by Gautam Buddha, who was a king and who could have easily enjoyed life, all the pleasures of life, because he had lot of money and power. But he left all the money and power, and he left home, he left his kingdom in search of the of something that was absolute in nature, that was peace and happiness. But according to Buddhism, there is nothing as the Advaita Vedanta talks about the real self or Atma. According to Buddhism, they deny the existence of self in that way. They do not base their understanding of self in terms of a center of consciousness which can be accessed in only certain in a certain way, which we had talked about earlier, which is the nirvikalp samadhi. Nirvikalp samadhi is something which according to Buddha was very difficult for the masses to understand. Buddha had a simple way of talking about all these matters, about self, about human existence, which in a way which was understandable by the common masses. Upanishads were written in a language called Sanskrit, and Sanskrit was the language at that time of Brahmins. Not everybody knew Sanskrit, not everybody could understand, read, or speak Sanskrit. So, according to Gautam Buddha, he tried to talk about all these matters in a language which was understood by the masses. So, he followed the language Pali instead of Sanskrit, Pali, because Pali was the language was the language at that time in which the masses used to talk to each other. And that is the whole point of difference between Buddhism and the other schools of thought which base themselves on Upanishadic knowledge. Buddha wanted to talk about matters related to the real life, everyday life of people as they were living at that time. So he did not want to talk about anything that was intellectual, that was too intellectualized for the masses to understand. So he said that there is nothing called self or the Atma which can only be accessed in, as we understood in the earlier slides, that Atma can be accessed, that can be reached only through Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So, according to Buddha, there is nothing so difficult to achieve which is called self, and which can be achieved only in a certain way of intellectualizing or thinking about yourself. So, according to Buddha, there is nothing called Atma, and the self that Buddha wanted to understand and that Buddha recognized was in the everyday life of people. And what Buddha looked at was the everyday life and the ups and downs of the everyday life. And according to Buddha, after observing and after meditating, Buddha came up with this understanding that the self which we experience in the everyday life, which is nothing but our um, attachments with the pleasures of life. Our, if we get the pleasures of life, we feel happy. If we do not get the pleasures of life, we feel sad. If we are getting a good, if we are getting good marks, we are happy. If we are not getting good marks, we are sad. If we are getting good amount of money in whatever profession we have, we are happy. If we are not, if money is not flowing in, we are sad. So this is the cycle of sorrow and happiness, sorrow and happiness. So according to Buddha, the everyday life of man is comprises of experiences which bring about lot of sorrow, because there is an attachment with the pleasures of life, there is an attachment with good marks, there is attachment with money, there is attachment with all the worldly pleasures that are there in this world. You if you want to have possess something, you do not get it you are sad. If somebody recognizes you, you are happy. If somebody does not recognize you, does not acknowledge your knowledge, does not acknowledge you, does not appreciate you, you feel sad. These are the actual, according to Buddhism, these are the reasons for unhappiness, or for not being able to achieve happiness and bliss. These are the reasons for sorrow. Your attachment with pleasures of life is what brings you sorrow. So, according to Buddha, self exists. Self is nothing but a state of happiness, peace, which cannot be attained till you identify with the pleasures of life, till you are running after the pleasures of life. Only when you can uh, leave, and only when you can renounce the attachment with the pleasures of life, only then you can experience what is self. So Buddha did not talk about Atma, did not talk about Nirvikalp Samadhi. Buddha only talked about the person's capacity to leave all the attachment with pleasures of life. And if you're able to leave the attachment with pleasures of life, only then can you achieve a state of happiness, peace within you. Only then you can attain something which is constant, a state of mind which is constant, which is not going up because you feel happy, which is not going down because you are feeling sad. So that cycle of happiness, feeling happy, sad is what the Buddhist school of thought wants to break. So they want to break the cycle of everyday living. In everyday living, there is a cycle of happiness, sadness, multiple emotions that we have. And this up and down, this happy, sad is what is not self according to Buddhism. According to Buddhism, they did not talk about, the intellectualized way of looking at self, but what they talked about was the sameness of experience, peace and happiness within you, a stable kind of peace within you, and which you can only attain when you get out of this cycle of happiness and sadness, happiness, sorrow. Whatever is happy at one moment and sad at another, happy, sad, happy is not the self. So, what is self is something that you experience when you break this cycle of happiness and sadness. Only then can you achieve a state of stability, stable, peaceful happiness, which according to Buddha is the self. And the way to achieve this self is only by renouncing, only by leaving the pleasures of life, attachment, only by leaving the attachment with all these pleasures of life. You don't feel attached to all the pleasures of life that you have. Only then can you experience yourself. Till the time you are caught up in this cycle of pleasures, because if there is pleasure, there is happiness. If there is no pleasure, there is pain. But only if you are able to come out of this cycle of pleasure and pain, and that can happen when you leave your attachment with the pleasures of life. Only when you are able to do this can you experience the self according to Buddhism. And the means to achieve this state is through self discipline, self control and contemplation, और चिंतन, जिसको हम चिंतन बोलते हैं, thinking about things, thinking about thinking deeply about the matters related to existence, thinking deeply about what is the purpose of life, why you came here, what all is guiding this whole cosmos. So, a deep kind of chintan or contemplation to feel that there is a certain impermanence attached with your attachment with the worldly things, with your attachment with the pleasures of life, with your attachment with different social roles, with your attachment with different social tags that come to you from others. So, only when you are able to realize this impermanence of this changing world, then only can you, when you think about it deeply, so when you contemplate and when you are able to control yourself, discipline yourself, only then can you reach the real self, which is also, even in Buddhism, that real self is the ultimate peace. There is this ultimate there is a permanent kind of peace and bliss or happiness, which we understand as self. But the only difference is in how Buddhism uh, conceptualizes this self. Rather than going to the Upanishads, the Buddhist thought is talking about the everyday life experience, and how self, whatever you experience, the ups and downs of your life, whatever you experience in terms of constant change, is not the self. Self can only be accessed, the real self or the real happiness can only be accessed by thinking about the impermanence in this world with which you attach yourself, the impermanence of pleasure, the impermanence of whatever you get from people around you, from the external environment. But only thing that is permanent is your happiness, which you can access when you are able to detach yourself, keep yourself away from the attachments of life. Now we come to understand the confluence or the parallels, how they converge, Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta. Where, what is the point where they converge? Even though they are two different schools of thought in Indian tradition, they talk about self in two different ways, but still, where they reach is the same. Where they reach, the true self, according, or the Atma, according to Advaita Vedanta, is that permanent center of awareness which flows in you and which is there, always there, when you are changing roles, when you are changing, outwardly things. But that center of sameness, that center of consciousness always remains the same, and that is the true self. And that can be accessed through nirvikalpa samadhi, when there is no difference between self as an object and self as a subject, where you become one with the experience. There is no difference between the who is experiencing and what is being experienced. There is no difference between that. The experience becomes a whole, a big large whole, where there is no difference between the self as subject, one who's experiencing, and the self as object, one which is being experienced. So um, and Buddhism, on the other hand, talks about self being realized in terms of the everyday life and the person's ability to renounce or get away or detach oneself from the pleasures of life. But both, in a way, reach a state of mind, both, in a way, talk about self in terms of achieving a state of mind which is permanent, stable, and which gives you ultimate happiness, which gives you ultimate peace and compassion with the whole cosmos that you are a part of. So, both have a common goal, and the common goal is dissipation or destruction of ego in order to overcome suffering. Destruction of ego means ego is that part within you which is attaching itself with the pleasures of life, with various pleasures of life according to Buddhism, and various social roles and dreams and thoughts according to Advaita Vedanta. So whatever is changing and your attachment with that change in life, all that changes, your attachment with all that changes in your life is what comprises your ego. So both the schools in fact talk about breaking away from ego, letting go of the ego. Buddhism talks about it in terms of letting go of the attachment with pleasures of life, and Advaita Vedanta talks about renouncing the ego by looking at, by going into experiences where of nirvikalpa samadhi, where there is no difference between what is who's experiencing and what is being experienced, where there is no distinction between self as an object and self as a subject. And those are the experiences which are outwardly experiences, which are actually, which do not have anything to do with worldly pleasures of, or worldly ambition or worldly achievements. Those are the experiences when you feel ultimate connect, according to Advaita Vedanta, ultimate connect with the whole cosmos or with the consciousness that surrounds you, which you are a part of. And the second thing that they both share, Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism share, is the rise of selflessness and infinite compassion. When you renounce all pleasures of life, then you are able to connect with the with the life in a way which makes you compassionate, which makes you connect with the whole universe, with all living beings, with even the non-living part of the universe. The whole cosmos then becomes, you become a part of the whole cosmos. You are, both through Buddhism or through Advaita Vedanta, the goal is the same. The goal is to destroy the ego, because only when you destroy your egoistic associations or attachments with the worldly pleasures, or with the ups and downs of the world, with social roles, with emotions, with thoughts, only then you can go to a state of mind which is pure, which is happy, which is bliss, which is blissful, and which is highly compassionate, which can connect with other beings, which can connect with other energies around you, the whole cosmos and the whole consciousness, which can help you connect with the creator and help you see that creator in other beings around you. So, in order to wind up our understanding of Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism, and in order to wind up our understanding of the self, what we have done in this video is to look at the Indian tradition, philosophical tradition. We have tried to see the Indian philosophical tradition into as comprised of two categories of schools. One category which bases itself on Upanishads, and the other which does not follow the Upanishadic tradition. They both, for the category of schools which follow Upanishadic tradition, we took up Advaita Vedanta, and we saw how self is understood in Advaita Vedanta and how it can be achieved. It is something which the real self is the Atma, and it can be achieved through Nirvikalpa Samadhi, which is a state of consciousness, which is a state of consciousness very different from the everyday consciousness that we live. And coming to the other category of schools which does not follow the Upanishadic tradition, we took up Buddhism, which talks about self as something which you cannot experience till the time you are attached with the pleasures of life. Only when you renounce the pleasures of life can you reach a state of mind which is beyond these ups and downs, and that is where the self lies according to Gautam Buddha. However, they both converge in terms of a goal that they carve for the mankind, for humans, and the goal is to let go of the ego. And ego is nothing but your attachment with different roles, with different pleasures of life, with different states, with different um, goals, with different achievements. And when you destroy, when you are able to give up your identification, when you don't define yourself through these changing, through all that is changing in your life, only then you are able to dissipate the ego. And that is when there is a rise within you of compassion and selflessness. And that compassion is so deep and so uh, is so strong that you're able to connect with this whole mankind, with this whole cosmos, not only mankind but also cosmos, all that is there around you, all that exists around you. And you form a special bond with the existence, with consciousness, with the creator who has created us. And you can see the creator in every being, in every moment of existence. You see the creator. So that is how we have tried to understand self from the Indian tradition. Indian tradition is too broad and too vast for anybody to talk about it in a short video. So we have just tried to look at the notion of self, the understanding of self within Indian tradition from two theoretical perspectives. One was Advaita Vedanta and the other was Buddhism.